Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. And I'll tell you what, this is a pretty interesting one because this could impact literally every single one of us, because it seems like games are about to get more expensive. It seems like the $60 that we were all used to, of course, not $60 in the UK, but you get my point, that standard price point, it seems like that might be about to change for the next generation, and there's going to be a lot of implications to this, as well as a few companies, well, specifically Take-Two Interactive, being, some ways smart, but other ways pretty darn ruthless. So this is going to be an interesting one. Hope you enjoyed the video. Of course, be sure to like and sub. It truly does help us out. And if you want to help us out a bit more and get the daily briefing, our daily news update service, as well as even a bunch of physical loot from our art team in your physical mailbox, then you can check out the Patreon. So with that said, let's get right into the video. Now, this is an interesting one. So here's the story, right? NBA 2K21's next-gen version is going to be a base price of $70. That's more than the $60 that people were, of course, used to for a game like that. Now, Take-Two and 2K Games are known as being, some of the most ruthlessly efficient companies, right? Really just, they're pretty ruthless, right? They're going to get what they can when they can, so it makes sense that they're maybe the company who's publicly leading the charge on this one. And their explanation is, and here's the quote, "We believe the price fairly represents the value of what's being offered." And obviously, people feel pretty darn strongly about this one because it is a major change. So, how likely is this to actually be a thing across the whole industry? Well, this is where we go to IDG Consulting. Now, they are saying that other publishers are heavily considering doing a move like this one, but it's probably only going to be for big titles and franchises that, can actually get away with it, right? So, in my head, that's your Rockstar games, your Assassin's Creed games, they can get away with it. Sports titles, they can also get away with it. Not because they're absolutely massive in their value proposition, though they are very replayable, of course, but I'd say because there's monopolies there, right? Like, if you want a basketball game, you're going to have to fork over $70 for NBA 2K21. There's pretty much nothing you can do about that. Now, if you want to get it now and, then get it on, on a new console, you're in a bit of a pickle because if you plan on upgrading consoles, then you're actually going to want to buy the $100, yes, the $100 special edition of the game, which will then give you a code that lets you get the game on the new console. And man, this is weird because if you think about smart delivery that Xbox has been doing, this flies totally against that. The whole point of smart delivery has been that, for Microsoft, if you are purchasing a game, now you can be confident, you can feel secure in your purchase that you'll get that game on your new console and you're not going to be double dipped, you're not going to be double charged, right? Very different to, say, buying The Last of Us and then The Last of Us remastered, I suppose. Remastered did have new settings and new changes and, some things like that, but I think you got the point there. Now, this goes against smart delivery, but 2K are in a situation with this game where they can just act really bullish and they can get away with it. Because, as I said, if you want your basketball fix, where the hell else are you going to get it? Nowhere, right? You're just not going to. Now, for games in general, this is 2K and Take-Two. So that also means Rockstar games. And I think is the next, is a Red Dead Redemption 3, a GTA 6, really going to have a base price of $60, considering how massive and full of content that those games are? Now, let's look at another game. Cyberpunk 2077. In what world does it make sense for, let's use another one, in what world does it make sense for Anthem, or maybe just base Destiny 2, for them to cost the same amount of money as Witcher 3? I don't know about you, but I think that something like Witcher 3 is more like, that could be a $100 game, a $120 game. If you think about the breadth of content that's going to be in it. If you think about what your $60 actually gets you, what is Cyberpunk actually an $85 game in terms of the value delivered to its audience, or a $90 game, whereas maybe a bunch of other traditionally $60 AAA games that are really threadbare are really a $40 game, right? You know what I mean? We're kind of stuck to this really rigid price point, but there's a situation where it's a game like Cyberpunk, it could totally get away with being more expensive because in many ways it's a more expensive game to make. It's a bigger game than other games. Why is it not going to cost more money? You kind of think about it really when you dive deep deep into value and try to think about it honestly, it's a very, very interesting thing. There are some $60 games that are worth more than other $60 games to consumers. I would very much say that. So it's an interesting one. Like, yes, they clearly have to crunch the hell out of a bunch of staff to actually get Cyberpunk to that point, but it certainly is going to be, I'd say, a higher value than average experience if you're using that $60 price point as a baseline. And then that is going to, for a lot of biz people, think, well, if we're producing something with a higher value than $60, why are we selling it for $60? And that's something that's going to be going through the heads of people who are in business, as it would for anyone, really. And I think you're going to start seeing that happen a lot more in the industry. But otherwise, for smaller games, it's a competitive market, right? And, you're in a situation, if you want a basketball game, you can't get it anywhere else. If you want to play a big Cyberpunk game or a Witcher game, you're not going to get it anywhere else. Same with a Rockstar game. So for games that are less unique and are maybe a bit smaller, it's still a competitive market, and that competition will actually, put prices, it will depress prices, right? That's how it goes. And that's especially when those games are maybe wanting to bring new gamers into the fold. Because yes, if you then think about it, $400 to $500 consoles plus $70 games, that is a little bit more expensive, especially if you then think that's, an expensive console that is maybe digitally only, and we're pushing people towards digital storefronts where you don't have the retail cut and where it's a bit more vertically integrated, and that the storefront is also the same as the publisher or maybe even the developer of the game, like it is with PlayStation Studios, Microsoft Studios. Yeah, then you've got a situation where maybe your margins are actually going up quite a bit within the industry, at least for those very biggest of players. To me, what it really comes down to, though, personally, I will say, is there's a thing about experiential value and time-based value. There's very short games like Journey that had great experiential value, and there's very long games that don't really have that much value to me because they haven't really felt great while I'm playing them. I think some MMOs sometimes do that when they're in their less interesting bits, whereas you've then maybe got a game like, say, Witcher 3 or hopefully Cyberpunk, where it could be a game with both tremendous time value to an audience, but also tremendous experiential value to an audience in terms of just how much quality is actually in each one of those hours of gameplay. So those things are going to be very interesting when it comes to pricing, and we'll get onto that a bit later. So as for what people think, there's a lot of back and forth going on. One thing that comes up is inflation. $60 15 years ago is very different to $60 now. And in many ways, games have got more expensive, even though they still cost $60. That might seem insane, but microtransactions, DLCs, special editions. Yeah, I'd say games are roughly the same price, but full experiences maybe are a different price. And maybe that's something we should start to think about. Maybe those are terms that are actually a bit more accurate as to what's going on within the industry. And then there's also the situation where, a lot of people will say that, but then they'll also say, well, have wages actually met inflation? And certainly I'd say there's sectors and stuff like that with our post-2008 recovery where maybe, real world wages, purchasing power hasn't really kept up with how inflation has been going, which would maybe be a bit of a ding against that argument that games should be more expensive because of inflation. Now, that's the inflation argument. There's also the side of explosively increasing development costs. This is something Sean Layden talked about. Now, Sean Layden was heading up the PlayStation Worldwide Studios. So he is a guy that has a lot of authority when it comes to something like this. He was saying that, the cost of games doubles from generation to generation. And his point there is, as everything's got to look more beautiful and be more detailed, it just takes more man hours. You just need more artists, etc., 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 to actually execute on a game concept. If you want to do a jungle exploration game, 20 years ago, that's a Crash Bandicoot, versus doing that now, your art assets are going to take a bit longer to do now. Sure, tools are more efficient now, but if you're just dealing with more complex scenes, more complex games, it's going to be like that. So in a way, you could see a price hike actually making sense there. Now, another thing that I think ties into that is games like Spider-Man, Miles Morales, where that's undoubtedly going to be reusing so many assets, but hopefully they're going to be able to put all those assets that are reused into a new form, right? To make a game that actually feels like a distinct, worthwhile, unique experience. Like, say, Uncharted 4, Lost Legacy, which seems to have been quite a success there. So maybe there's a case that we need to be more flexible in pricing, but also maybe developers need to be more flexible in how they use their assets and what they actually have available to them to actually create valuable experiences for consumers. And maybe there's a case where things like Miles Morales, Uncharted Lost Legacy, I don't know, Saints Row, Get Out of Hell actually make a little bit more sense for people to make. Maybe smaller products for smaller markets where the costs all make sense just actually are going to make more sense as the industry sort of matures and grows. And then I guess as well, you're dealing with games like Star Wars Squadrons, a more niche experience, and a smaller one probably in terms of the absolute amount of content, but one that is being priced appropriately. And that maybe makes me think, is the real thing here, the real thing we need to think about is flexible pricing. Because in the indie sphere, right, we all just think of $60 is what a AAA game costs. But if you then look at the indie sphere, there is flexible pricing. The game that we are working on, we started off thinking that would be a game with a budget of 25 grand that would probably last an hour and would be a smaller experience like Mike Bithel's, Subsurface Circular. And then as we worked on that idea, we began to be like, no, this is going to be maybe a 6 to 8 hour long experience. In which case we were obviously like, well, this is going to cost more money to make, and obviously it's going to be a higher price thing because we're going to be delivering more overall value to customers. That exists in the indie sphere. It doesn't actually exist as much in AAA, as evidenced by the fact that you can spend $60 on 10 different AAA games and have vastly different value experiences with where your $60 actually got you. Which maybe makes you think that some AAA games should be less than $60, maybe some others should be more than $60. Who knows? Are you going to get more out of your Cyberpunk $60 than you are out of another game $60? I'd say you're probably going to get more out of your Cyberpunks and your Witchers. That's just not me being a fanboy for those games. It's just if you think about what they actually are, for Witcher, like the critical response, the quality of the writing, the amount of content, and compare that to other games that have the same price tag. It gets very interesting. That's maybe when you start to think, oh, I sort of see what Take-Two are actually getting at here. Obviously, that's a bit controversial because the thing is, we'd all like to be able to say, yeah, maybe games should be $10, $15 more expensive, and then be a bit more reasonable with DLCs. And maybe have, not have psychologically manipulative microtransactions in them. But then the thing is, can you trust the industry to actually do that? Surely what they would far rather do is increase the price of games and still do FIFA Ultimate Team. Or, the NBA version or the basketball game version of FIFA Ultimate Team. Surely they'd rather do that, right? So it always does come back to that trust thing, and that's where it really is quite hard. But I guess certainly the idea of a games company not being totally pegged to $60 and actually having to earn their price point instead of just choose the default one, I think that is an interesting topic of discussion. So I guess as for final thoughts of this, if this stuff happens more, it makes PS Plus or PS Now, Games Pass, it makes those things seem a little bit more valuable, right? And, like a lot of people are sort of conflating like streaming and rental and how Netflix upended the movie market. So, maybe if games get more expensive, then those sort of big subscription services could actually start to make more sense to people. And maybe that could change things up quite a bit. But overall, I'd say that, look, personally, I would be happy for games like Spider-Man, Miles Morales, Uncharted Lost Legacy, Saints Row, Get Out of Hell. I'd be happy for those to exist, less expensive games to make, where the focus is on giving the players new content and new experiences within a sort of a framework they already know. If we're getting that, but maybe it's at a lower price, that's pretty cool to me. And in the same way, if there can be a business case for a $90 game that is absolutely goddamn immense and then has no BS in it, then I suppose I'm also okay with that. But can you trust the industry to do it right? That is where I think it's where the rubber meets the road, right? So I think that's where we really have to end this one. I'd love to know what you think, though. Witcher 3, was that actually worth $75 to you, considering everything you got from it? Or was it worth $60? What are your, real honest views on value there? And I don't mean value just in terms of I want to get the best deal possible. We all want that. But in terms of, the base value of a product and how that should be reflected in pricing, I think that's an extremely fascinating topic. It's something that plays out in other industries in a very different way to how it plays out in games. And that's why I'd be pretty darn interested to see what you think and what you think is going to be going on with the next gen. So that is it for this video. Of course, there's also going to be content up on our channel about the House of Lords. And, will that actually make it to the House of Commons in regards to loot boxes? Massive stuff there that ties into the video we also just did on Bobby Kotick talking about esports betting. So really interesting stuff. Lots of content to check out on the channel. Thank you for watching today's video. And with that, I will see you next time.